We're live now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Socialist Action Webcast. This is the webcast number 2 in the Spring 2023 series. My name is Elizabeth Bice. I'm the Federal Treasurer of Socialist Action, a member of the NDP Socialist Caucus Steering Committee, a past Secretary of the Toronto and York Region Labour Council, and a retired member of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. We acknowledge that this event is taking place on Indigenous lands across Turtle Island, known as North America. That includes the unceded territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Wendat, and Haudenosaunee people, in a place called Toronto. Today, I'm speaking to you from Jamaica, where the Indigenous Taino and Arawak-speaking people began arriving here 4,000 years ago. They were wiped out by European colonial powers. We join in the fight for justice, recognizing that there can be no real reconciliation without restitution. That entails seizing the assets of the big resource corporations and returning them to the commons. The topic tonight is the United Front versus the Popular Front, featuring Gary Porter and Florencia Shade, Socialist Action leaders based in British Columbia. This webcast will explore the distinction between independent working class political action as opposed to class collaboration with liberal bourgeoisie forces. It will draw the lessons of revolutions defeated due to illusions in the neutrality of the boss's state and workers' subordination to capitalist interests. It will look at this issue in the current political context. So let's welcome our first speaker. Gary Porter is a leading member of Socialist Action. He is a retired chartered professional accountant who served on the board of directors of some of the largest labor pension funds in the country. Gary has written and spoken on a wide range of topics as a revolutionary socialist. He is on the NDP Socialist Caucus Federal Steering Committee and lives in Victoria, British Columbia. Welcome, Gary. You're muted.
Sorry, gang, I was muted. So thank you, Elizabeth. I'm very happy to be here, and I shall start in right now. As 2023 unfolds, the question of strategy may confront the working class in ways that it has not for decades. The strength to fight back against capitalist onslaught and the onslaught of austerity coupled with an insurgent right wing will hinge on whether the working class unites itself by itself or allies with a class enemy, the capitalist class. It is not enough to possess the sword, one must give it an edge, said Leon Trotsky in 1922. And it is not enough to have a sword with an edge, you must learn how to wield it, he added. These words are found in the report on the question of French communism, which Trotsky was working out a detailed conception of the United Front in materials that he prepared for the Communist International. His context then was specifically the role of communists in France, but he laid the theoretical groundwork for understanding the difference between a united front based on the mobilization of the working class, independent of the ruling class and its political parties, the class enemy, and one based on the alliance with elements of the ruling class, the so-called progressive bourgeoisie. The latter kind of alliance came to be known as the Popular Front or the People's Front. And in every instance throughout working class history, it has resulted in betrayal and defeat. What is a united front? Trotsky was discussing these questions in the context in which revolutionary mobilization was on the agenda. This was just in the years following the Russian Revolution, and in which the question was posed whether the working class would wrest power away from the bourgeoisie. His text covers, among other things, how the revolutionary organization that is smaller than other working class parties, such as those of the Social Democrats, can gain the leadership of a revolutionary movement. But beyond these questions, what Trotsky spells out is critically important for how the working class must organize in general to defend its own interests. Today, such considerations are on the agenda all over the world because murderous right-wing terrorism has arisen, a movement that is increasingly targeting directly and violently people of color, members of the working class more generally, people who are the LGBTQI plus spectrum and others, as well as the organizations of the working class itself. To confront this threat, many are advocating that we join forces in Canada, for example, with the Liberal Party, one of the twin parties, perhaps even the main party of Canadian capitalism. Jagmeet Singh, leader of the New Democratic Party, and the Social Democrats and the NDP leadership are actually in such an alliance as we speak. Such an alliance is not what is meant by the United Front. In the face of clashes with the right, the working class needs unity in action in resisting the onslaught of capitalism, as well as unity in taking offensive against capitalism and moving towards a workers' state. It is a revolutionary organization's responsibility to take up the struggle for unity of the working class within the context of class independence. The United Front is about providing the working class with the strength that comes from unity of action as it wages and struggles against the rulers. The unity is based on the developing specific agreements for action with other forces within the workers' movement, broadly defined, without allying with the enemy. It does not hide differences, but strives to find areas where the necessary task can be undertaken in a coordinated manner. To make a proverbial fist out of the individual fingers and thus create greater striking force. The united part of this conception does not mean retreat from disagreements on fundamental questions of the working class movement. It means rather seeking agreement in all those areas where the masses that follow them are ready to engage in joint struggle together with those that follow us. The United Front compels the reformists to a lesser or greater degree to become an instrument of this struggle, usually against their wishes. For the reformist parties and trade unions, the United Front puts the onus on them to join or stand in the way. Apart from all other considerations, Trotsky wrote, we are interested in dragging the reformists from their asylums and placing them alongside of us before the eyes of the working masses. Through the United Front, not only is the struggle strengthened, but the revolutionaries struggling alongside activists who remain unconvinced of the need for revolutionary politics can be engaged, and we can win them to the perspective of going further to the creation of a workers' government working towards a worker state. They do this as actual participants in the struggle, by far the easiest way to learn anything, rather than as critics or spectators on the sidelines. Any party which mechanically counterposes itself to the need for working class unity in action, said Trotsky, quote, will unfailingly be condemned in the minds of the workers. The task is to build a united front with organizational avenues for joint coordinated action. Okay, so the engagement of the working class tendencies is both a part of the strategy to win and an opportunity to break the working class away from its reformist tendencies and those reformist leaders who strive toward conciliation with the bourgeoisie. The leaders of these other tendencies, social democrats, Stalinists, and several other tendencies, dread the revolutionary potential of the mass movement. Their beloved area is the parliamentary tribune, the trade union bureaus, the arbitration boards, the ministerial antechambers. And it counters, the United Front also counters the revolutionary, the centrists of the left. These are people who claim to be revolutionary, but who continually vacillate between the revolutionary class independents and the reformists. The United Front is a life and death issue. In early 1920s France, the groupings Trotsky was seeking to bring together in a united front that included the Socialist Party, the very reformists of the Second International, with which the revolutionaries had split to form the Communist International, the syndicalists organized in French trade union movements, and the broader trade union confederations that organized the bulk of the French working class. So that was what he was talking about, was bringing those tendencies together. A dozen years later, again in France, the question facing the working class was not a revolutionary upsurge, but the necessity of mounting a life and death struggle against the rise of fascism. This was in 1935. Trotsky's conception of the United Front confronted a new coalition of the proletariat with the imperialist bourgeoisie. Trotsky described the People's Front, and that was what it was called, so the Front Populaire. In other words, the very alliance with the class enemy that he had warned about in 1922. The idea had come from the bureaucratic caste that led the Soviet Union and its leader, Joseph Stalin. It was developed to defend the caste's interests from threats, both internal and external, but not the threats that you might immediately imagine. Stalin feared nothing more than proletarian revolution in other countries, which would challenge him and his band of counter-revolutionary thugs who solidified their grasp over the Soviet Union after the revolution of 1917. It became the prevailing approach by those who followed Stalin's ideas, even well beyond his death. It was the codification of abandoning class independence and putting the working class firmly in league with and under the leadership of the bourgeoisie. In France, the privileged position in that alliance was given over to a bourgeois party called the Radical Party. Workers were relegated to propping up the bourgeois members of the coalition. The greatest danger in France, wrote Trotsky, lies in the fact that the revolutionary energy of the masses will be dissipated in spurts and give way to apathy. Only conscious traitors or hopeless muddleheads are capable of thinking that in the present situation, it is possible to hold the masses immobilized up to the moment when they are blessed from above by a government of the People's Front. Strikes, protests, street clashes, direct uprisings are absolutely inevitable in the present situation. The task of the proletarian party, the Revolutionary Party, consists not in checking and paralyzing these movements while elections take place, but in unifying them and investing them with the greatest possible force. The situation can be saved only by aiding the struggling masses to create a new apparatus in the process of the struggle itself, which meets the requirements of the moment. So that was Trotsky's advice. This is the task of building the United Front, independent of the class enemy. In France at the time, this was embodied in the concept of committees of action. In Russia, they were called Soviets or workers' councils. And this was the only means of breaking the anti-revolutionary opposition of the party and trade union apparatus, was to have these new workers' councils, which had direct worker representation. Trotsky called in December 1931 for a workers' united front against fascism in Germany. It was in that piece he articulates the perspective of mass mobilization. Where have we heard that before? A joint struggle by the entire working class through its parties and organizations to destroy the fascists and even prepare the working class for a direct struggle for power. That includes, if necessary, taking up arms of the masses for self-defense. According to this perspective, fascism is a war unleashed by the bourgeoisie at the moment when it sees crushing the working class and its organizations as the last hope for preserving capitalist rule. For this reason, it becomes decisive to maintain the critical independence from the class enemy of a united front, in direct contradistinction to the Popular Front, which is, as I've said, an alliance with the class enemy. Trotsky's 1935 article on France elaborates this point. Such tasks as the creation of workers' militias, the arming of the workers, the preparation of a general strike will remain on paper if the struggling masses themselves, through their authoritative independent organizations, do not occupy themselves with these tasks. Now, I want to just discuss the Popular Front's litany of defeats. From the 1930s to today, the Popular Front approach has proven itself to be not only counter-revolutionary, but deadly. In the period 1934 to 39, when the political alliance subordinated the interests of the working class to the bourgeoisie and its capitalist political parties, it helped to facilitate fascism's solidification and expansion of power. The strategy was adopted in Spain at the beginning of the 1936 as an electoral coalition among ostensibly revolutionary organizations and supporters of the Spanish Republic, organized in bourgeois parties. It was Stalin's commentary that pushed for a coalition with anyone, including the class enemy, that declared its opposition to fascism. And thus the hope of the Spanish workers and peasants were subordinated once more to the bourgeoisie. The Popular Front, the actual name of the electoral coalition, won the 1936 election, but failed to prepare the working class to defend itself. That summer, the generals the four generals, the Los Cuatro Generales, instigated a coup d'etat and sparked the Spanish Civil War. Class collaboration stymied the workers' movement in the fight, and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union eventually chose the favor of the hostile European bourgeoisie over providing sufficient material aid to the Spanish workers. In May 1936, in France, the Popular Front, also the Electoral Coalition's name, won the legislative elections and informed the government that was first headed by Léon Blum, the leader of the Social Democratic Party, today known as the Socialist Party. Almost immediately, the French workers' movement launched a general strike to win the social reforms that it expected from a Popular Front government. And to be sure, some reforms were won, including large wage increases in the 40-hour work week. But the situation in Europe, the persistence of the global depression, the rise of fascism, and the growing threat of war posed a solution for the working class that was antithetical to the Popular Front, the overthrow of capitalism. How can you have a goal of overthrowing capitalism when you have capitalists sitting in the cabinet? Things were exacerbated by high unemployment and runaway inflation. The ruling class was desperate to supercharge its arms industry for the coming war. Everything the working class had won stood in the way. How could revolution be accomplished if the working class was organized in alliance with part of the capitalist class? It couldn't. After World War II, the Popular Front approach continued as the Stalinist led workers into alliances with bourgeois forces in France and Italy, the so-called liberation governments, to tamp down revolutionary upsurges by workers. These alliances with capitalists also put the workers' movement in cahoots with the bourgeoisies, bound and determined to crush the growing anti-colonial struggles in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. 50 years ago, in September 1970, the people of Chile elected a Popular Front government that ended up leading to disaster. Salvador Allende won a narrow plurality, not a majority, in the presidential election. He was the candidate of the Unidad Popular, or Popular Unity. Yet another alliance between Stalinist and Social Democratic parties with various other forces on the left and parties that represented the so-called liberal wing of the Chilean bourgeoisie. In an example of history's morbid sense of humor, one of these parties was even called the Radical Party, just as in France in the 1930s. Allende's election as president was secured when another bourgeois party, much larger, the Christian Democrats, decided to vote in favor of his candidacy when the election was shown to be resolved by the Chilean National Congress. In power, the Popular Unity government of Allende pursued La Via Chilena e Socialismo, the Chilean way to socialism, nationalizing some large-scale industries and redistributing some of the land. Big landowners balked. Financiers began to agitate against the government. The Catholic Church expressed its opposition to educational reforms that lessens its role in the country school. As the Christian Democrats and other bourgeois components of the Popular Front began to abandon ship, the situation for the Chilean working class became more and more tenuous and dangerous. On September 11th, 1973, the original 9/11, Allende was overthrown in a bloody military coup led by General Augusto Pinochet, backed by the US government and largely organized and funded directly by the CIA. The coupists butchered some 30,000 workers and peasants, particularly targeting leftists of all stripes. Close to 100,000 people were forced to flee to other countries, where for years they were hunted down and murdered by Pinochet's secret police as part of a terror campaign organized by the CIA called Operation Condor. I met a woman who was in that situation during that time, and her mother had been captured and murdered. In the meanwhile, the Chilean junta imposed brutal economic austerity that decimated the standard of living of the Chilean people, as its country's ruling class enriched themselves grotesquely at their expense. Allende's Popular Front in Chile had sown the seeds of its own destruction at the hands of the generals, who, working on behalf of the ruling class, launched a coup that paved the way to the bloody defeat. To win confirmation in Congress and the support of the Christian Democrats, Unidad Popular succumbed to the demands of the class enemy that would ensure that institutions of the capitalist rule were maintained and that bourgeois order would persist. One of the most important of these demands made it easy for the military to slaughter the people, a prohibition of the creation of private, that is, workers' militias, and a firm agreement that no police or military officers would be appointed who had not been trained in the bourgeois established academies. Allende's cabinet put the most right-leaning class collaborationists of the alliance's left forces, the Social Democrats, in charge of internal security. The Liberal Radical Party got the Ministry of National Defense, and the die was cast. The political regime inherited from that coup is at the very foundation of the uprisings that erupted again in Chile in the latter part of 2019. All right, let's just draw a couple of lessons. The Popular Front strategy not only failed to stop fascism in the 1930s, it has proved time and again to be a path to defeat of the working class. Collaboration with the bourgeoisie is no different than inviting a fox into the henhouse. And as the Chilean experience shows, the ruling class will put the shackles on advancing revolution at every turn. In that case, it demanded the country's constitution be amended to prevent workers from arming themselves to defend their gains and their lives. Today, we confront a declining capitalist system struggling to maintain its hegemony by forcing the costs of the decline onto the working class. Far-right groups such as the People's Party in Canada, the Convoy leadership, and Poilievre's, even a wing of Poilievre's Conservative Party, are targeting people of color, immigrants, and the entire working class as capitalism's economic and social crisis worsens, being fueled by the pandemic, war, and climate change, and imperialist desperation. These forces may become the direct tool of the bourgeoisie to maintain its hold on power and its ability to continue to exploit us. Will we fight that with our own power, or will we follow the deadly example of the Popular Front? Jagmeet Singh expresses the view of the Social Democrats. They believe in that the state is a neutral element rather than one constructed solely for the purpose of keeping the ruling class in power. History makes it clear which choice guarantees defeat and which offers us at least a chance to survive and win. Whether we are confronting a rising right-wing threat, even fascism, or we are fighting the attacks that have been coming and will continue to come from both the Liberal and Tory administrations, our class independence will be decisive. The strategy and tactics that the working class chooses today and tomorrow have very serious consequences indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Our next speaker is Flo Shade. She's a leading member of Socialist Action living in Tsimshian territory around what is now called Terrace, British Columbia. She is a mother, a community advocate, and a lifelong learner who has set her sights on overthrowing capitalism. She serves on the NDP Socialist Caucus Federal Steering Committee. Welcome, Flo.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And thanks, Gary, for that great overview on the meanings of United Front and the Popular Front. So with that understanding as a foundation, that a United Front is an action coalition between independent working class entities, and a Popular Front is distinguished by a section of the working class politically collaborating with a section of the bourgeoisie against the bigger section of the bourgeoisie. Naturally, important questions arise as to what that might look like in practice. The truthful answer is it's complicated and not always immediately clear, which makes it a perfect discussion and education topic. What's certainly expounded time and time again by Lenin and Trotsky is that specific tactics should be determined by specific circumstances and depend on a Marxist-informed objective analysis of the material, social, and political conditions in order to have a principled effect. The notion of maintaining party independence amongst a vacillating, highly unstable, and constantly changing socio-political configuration of pre-revolutionary society is found all over Lenin's writing, but takes particular shape in his work, Left-Wing Communism, an Infantile Disorder, wherein he takes stock of and reviews the tactics and lessons of the recently won Russian Revolution. His concept is teased out and further developed by Trotsky in later writings on the United Front and Popular Front, wherein he gives it a more fleshed out framework based on principles of class dynamics. The concept of United Front really makes sense and takes shape when you realize the context it came from and contrast it with other forms of organizing championed by other ideological factions at the time. And in fact, it all sounds very familiar to today as well, which we can get into later on or during the Q&A. Indeed, as well, the necessity of theorizing on tactics of engagement was increased by the heightened contradictions resulting from the specter and advent of World War, which brought pre-revolutionary fervor, the quickening consolidation of political groupings, and the need to establish independent yet consistently principled and engaged tactics to the forefront. Lenin experienced and expressed the need for independence from both the social democrat reformists as well as the ultra-left anarchist types, as he accurately detected a shared bourgeois sensibility between them, sitting just underneath the revolutionary sloganeering. These movements are counter-revolutionary insofar as they both effectively render revolution impossible, exactly through their lack of internal party discipline, cohesion, education, motivation, and principles, resulting in a comprehensive lack of effective organizing and/or a weak foundation that is easily and immediately toppled. While the careerist social democrats love to lord their institutional power over us, and the anarchists love to grandstand about theoretical purity, the greatest danger these movements actually present for proletarian power is in fact their very weakness as an organized revolutionary force. Marxism is an important glue that holds the party together as a collective force, and this is needed to ensure the party will be able to bounce back from and withstand inevitable defeat. It's what will give the proletarians a real chance at claiming power when the time is right. While I was reading these works on the United Front and party external relations, I kept being struck by how many times the authors would return to the issue of internal party dynamics as the foundation by and through which external dynamics materialized. And this does make sense if you think about it. It's another expression, this time the political, of material dialectics in action, wherein the internal expression of the party is one side of the interplay between how the party functions and is received in external areas and all the consequences deriving from that. What this means in practice, then, is that the proper orientation the Revolutionary Party should take in a united front is one of leadership, where we are the ones leading and organizing the calls and coordinating the actions. And where this cannot be the case, we maintain the right to freely criticize or withdraw collective action based on adherence to Marxist principles. It obligates us, the party, to ready and prepare ourselves for that leadership at every stage possible. This inculcates within our mission the necessity of membership educationals, cohesion, outreach, capacity building, and solidarity between comrades. It means we need an engaged leadership and active membership, not only for the reasons of organizational sustainability, but as a requirement for revolutionary success itself. The scrambling and confusion that goes on during periods wherein the conditions are ripening always raises the questions of tactics, because it raises at the same time the very question of correct analysis, of which theory informs what practices, and which actions and behaviors are going to produce the intended effect. Unfortunately, it's not always a straightforward gambit. It has been and will continue to be a bit of a trial and error game, which is why historical education and group memory is so useful and potentially powerful, because the only way to learn from experiences of history is to recall it and to know how to accurately translate the lessons for today. It's also why internal dynamism is an important factor in the dialectic, because as Lenin put it, a successful army knows how to properly retreat as well as attack. The issue of the confused revolutionary fervor that develops during times of capitalist degradation is a relevant one. And it's something I think we're seeing a lot of now in the seemingly bizarre orientation of the far right to take up the mantle of the working class. Indeed, as they appear to be winning their votes. We have Poilievre winning the majority of the working class and the ascendance of Trump, the anti-war candidate in the US. On the face of it, these are strange and confusing times. With some Marxist analysis, however, it becomes more clearly understood. The very weakness and sophistry alleged by Lenin by the Social Democrats is what allowed the rise of fascism to occur in the first place. And this is a danger we contend with still. By the time of 1935, when Trotsky wrote his piece on the People's Front, in the confused advent towards World War II, the socialist parties had lost some cohesion and strength. This was more of an issue, so he turned his direction towards the class collaborators under the People's Front and the Radical Party. The exploiters of the petty bourgeoisie, he called them, joining forces with the exploiters of the proletariat, the reformists. Today we find this parallel in the People's Party of Canada and the various iterations of libertarian parties, who similarly to the Social Democrats espouse an economy of fair capitalism made up of mom and pop shops, which ignores the class consolidation inherent to the capitalist logic of monopoly. The worst contemporary offender may be Jagmeet Singh and his supportive agreement keeping the Liberals in government. Though he hasn't officially melded with the party yet, it's clear workers' interests were subordinated to the authority of the Liberal program. Clearly, history has shown us that class collaboration and entering particularly into political agreements which subordinate the interests of the proletariat and cede authoritative power in any respect to the bourgeoisie is a recipe for inevitable failure. Taken all together, this means that the Revolutionary Party must show strength and leadership in the United Front, because it's exactly through the consistent and principled interaction of the party that demonstrates its capability and exposes in front of everyone the contradictions and malicious lies of capitalism. I would like to just grab a drink of water if I could just be right back. Okay, sorry, just getting over a cold. Okay, so taken all together, this means that the Revolutionary Party must show strength and leadership in the United Front, because it's exactly through consistent and principled interaction that the party demonstrates its capabilities and exposes in front of everyone the contradictions and malicious lies of capitalism. Capitalism does the degradation and contradictions for us. Our task is primarily in exposing this and waking people up to the truth about the inevitable direction of the capitalist mode of production, which is unbearable suffering and oppression of the underclasses. We demonstrate this through principled leadership in the United Front, which organically brings the proletarian towards the movement, as it shows leadership and strength in legitimately fighting for workers' interests and utilizing power to that effect at every chance. Essentially, the task is to put your money where your mouth is and let the masses come to you. This is important to realize when you contrast it with the fervent but ultimately directionless activity of the reformists and social patriots. Today, the Social Democrats or the libertarians. They may talk a good game. They may say all the right things about the working class, but when push comes to shove and it's time to decide where material loyalties lie, the opportunists out themselves every time. This is bound to happen. What is important is that the party is there to swoop in and demonstrate what real proletarian leadership looks like. Failing a strong sense of proletarian leadership, the risk of fascism becoming entrenched in the political system remains present. The fascists are pretend strongmen, and they will draw the agitated forces suffering under capitalism towards them through typical charlatan lying. But it will work without a strong revolutionary leadership force organizing the proletariat as a class. Thus, the correct approach is not to eschew and avoid parliamentarism or electoral politics completely. This is part of the infantile disorder that Lenin speaks about. It's rather to use Marxist principles to correctly analyze the situation at hand and engage strategically, both legally and illegally, to build the movement, both inside Parliament and outside of it. It is through the struggle that the workers will learn who the true revolutionaries are and will gravitate towards them in the building of dual power. This is why we continue to meet the working class wherever they are at. We engage them while showing good faith in organizing with the reformists for specific achievable goals, which serve working class interests. This is why we are active within the NDP and the Socialist caucus, as well as the trade union movement as the Workers' Action Movement. In the natural course of things, the reformist opportunist leaders will expose themselves as defenders of capital, despite their empty promises, because they always are. It's just a matter of time and place. This obligates the Revolutionary Party to stand guard, ready, available, and present to lead the working masses towards collective action and the taking of power. We need to work dialectically through internal and external activity and through strategic engagement with institutional forces while maintaining independence from other groups in thought and action. This is the basis for United Front work. I'll just end with this quote from Trotsky on the United Front, 1922, sums it up pretty well. We participate in a united front, but do not for a single moment become dissolved in it. We function in the united front as an independent detachment. It is precisely in the course of struggle that broad masses must learn from experience that we fight better than the others, that we see more clearly than the others, that we are more audacious and resolute. In this way, we shall bring closer the hour of the United Revolutionary Front under undisputed communist leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Flo. Okay, so now, and thank you, Gary. So now we will take some questions from our online audience, and I will give each speaker an opportunity of 6 minutes each to answer 3 questions. So I'm going to go to our technical producer now to read the first 3 questions. Berika?
Yep, thank you. So the first question comes from Roy Jones. His question is, besides Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell, what is a good book to read more from about tonight's topic? And then the second question comes from Judy. She asks, did Stalin invent the Popular Front? And the third question is from Ellen. The NDP/Liberal Pact, is that an example of a popular front? So I've also put the questions in the chat, so you can read those.
Okay, thank you, Barakat. Okay, we will start with Gary. You have up to 6 minutes, Gary.
Sorry, Barakat.
Yes, Gary?
Can you read that third question again?
Yeah. So the third question comes from Ellen. The question is, the NDP/Liberal Pact, is that an example of a popular front?
Okay.
Okay, so you have up to 6 minutes, Gary.
Okay. It's not a perfect example, but it has the substance of it, because basically the NDP, first of all, the NDP supports capitalism. The NDP is a social democratic party. It describes itself that way. And social democracy is based on the notion that capitalism is the best system. And what has to happen is it needs to be reformed in this or that aspect to make life perfect. We know that capitalism is, by its very nature, its fundamental nature, a system of exploitation and repression. We have a fundamental difference there, and that leads them to all kinds of confusion, because they look at Trudeau and they manage to see differences that I don't see very well. They see them very clearly. That Trudeau is somehow better than the Tories. But Trudeau is a strikebreaker. He's done it many times. Trudeau is a financier of fighter jets and frigates. He is a financier of NATO. He is a supporter of the American war against Russia by proxy in Ukraine, killing Ukrainians by the hundreds of thousands. He and his government were the organizers of the pretender in Venezuela. Maybe somebody can remember his name, but anyway, they organized that, and now he's nobody. He couldn't win at all in Venezuela, but they made an attempt to create a coup against the elected government in Venezuela. And Canada, and they support the mining industry, which in Canada is among the biggest in the world, going into third worlds and super exploiting the people for their own benefit, and then washing their profits through tax shelters so that they end up paying no tax in Canada. In those countries, what they do is one of the biggest of the Canadian companies refused to pay taxes and refused to pay royalties, and finally got the government to settle for pennies on the dollar. And that's now, why would you do that? I mean, to a poor colonial government. But they do it because they can get away with it. So this is the government of Trudeau, but this is the government that Jagmeet Singh thought he should ally with to keep out the Tories and keep off an election. See, he only sees elections as the way forward. He does not see the mobilization of the working class and the forcing of changes, the way the pending general strike in Ontario forced the Conservative government to withdraw their violation of constitutional rights against CUPE workers by denying them the right to strike. They said, well, let's see now, we'll just go on a general strike with all of labor. And Doug Ford recoiled from that, absolutely not wanting such a thing to happen, and withdrew that bill. That's how you win goals immediately, by mass labor action. And so rather than see any perspective like that, Jagmeet Singh negotiates with Trudeau. Trudeau says he will implement pharmacare and dental care, but he has nothing to do. He has not done anything on pharmacare. He's offered $650 per family for children 12 and under, which is the section of the population which has the fewest dental problems. And Jagmeet Singh, in return, has supported the total budget of the government, the throne speech listing all the priorities of the government. He supports the war. He supports Canadian participation in NATO. He doesn't challenge the mining industry and its predations all over the world. And so he's giving up way more than he's getting. Did he get any cabinet ministers? No, Trudeau said, no, I don't think so. We don't need anybody from your party in our cabinet. So, for very little. So it's, popular fronts. So it's not a popular front in the sense that it's not a coalition. Well, it has elements of the popular front because it relies on the bourgeoisie, in this case, the powerful government of the bourgeoisie, to carry out your reforms, and they won't do it. Okay, I've probably spent my whole 6 minutes on that one question.
No, I don't think so. The producer didn't warn you, I don't think.
Okay, well,
It should be good.
what you can read on the United Front, there are, I don't know, I'm going to, well, you can read the pamphlets of Trotsky in a Comintern on the ones that I referred to, that were Trotsky's writings on France, his writings on fascism, what it is and how to fight it, where he takes up the question of popular front and the failure of the Communist Party to refusal to form a united front with the German Social Democrats to fight fascism. So his writings on Trotsky, there's lots written on Chile, and perhaps Barry Weisetter, if he's in the audience, knows if essay has anything written on Chile, or something else that might be. What I read basic writings by Lenin and Trotsky on this question, which unfortunately are kind of spread through the writings of the Comintern.
Okay, thank you, Gary Tho. You have up to 6 minutes to answer the 3.
Okay, on the first question, books, yeah, I don't know any novels or anything, but I can definitely recommend at this point Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. It goes through so much of these issues, and I just find it really neat how you can see the germination of these ideas and how they're, it's picked up and developed. As well, it's really so actually I'm hopeful that we can do like a reading group or something on that doc or that book, that piece of work, and being mindful of the timeline when it was written is also very helpful and instructive as well. Something that became really clear to me too, just through kind of researching for this, is that so much happens, like things can happen really quickly when the conditions are ripening and going quickly, and so it really does matter. I feel like it is relevant where along the process you are reading these works and putting them in the context, because something I noticed too, I found Lenin's like earlier works, before he had the experience of the revolution, like 1902, 1903, I think when he wrote What Is to Be Done, I mean, it looks a lot different than this 1920 document, Left-Wing Communism. And I think it actually, you can see it includes the lessons of real experience, which is where a lot of these tactical questions come from, and where the idea of a united front and this whole idea really is born, is through experience and through the struggle. Doesn't really answer the question, except that it's a good one to read. And did Stalin invent the Popular Front? I don't know. I'm probably going to say probably not, but he seems to have popularized it. Or, I mean, the Stalinists still love a Popular Front. I believe the CP in Canada is officially endorsing the Liberal Party. They still do the lesser of two evils, which is essentially, if you wanted to boil down the Popular Front into one soundbite, that's what it is. It's lesser of two evil politics, basically. Subordinating class interests for bourgeois authority. I mean, once you enter in an actual political formation, it's that's the expression that Trotsky was analyzing. Things are, things have shifted a bit now, but I do think that the dynamic remains and is important. And that I think we can see pretty glaringly in the NDP Liberal Pact, because what are they getting for it? I mean, what has the working class got from that? Which answers question 3.
Okay, thank you, Flo. In the chat, there's 3 books recommended. Clara Zitkin wrote What is Fascism? And also Trotsky's The Struggle Against Fascism in Germany, and also Ernest Mandel books on this question. So that's some books that our audience can look into if they wish. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our technical producer for 3 more questions. Go ahead, Erica.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. So I'll send these questions in the chat as well. So first question comes from Julius, and he asks, why is it so difficult for groups on the left to engage in united front efforts? Second question comes from Barry. They ask, fascism is a mass movement that expresses the extreme crisis of late capitalism, but how to stop fascism without terminating the system that gives rise to it? And then a following question from Barry. How does the Workers' United Front act as both a defensive and offensive strategy for the working class? So you have 6 minutes.
Okay, so we're going to start with Flo this time. You have up to 6 minutes, Flo.
Okay, why is it so difficult for groups on the left to engage in united front efforts? That's a very good question. But it's interesting because reading these texts, which is very instructive, yeah, you can see that it's a lot of the same arguments. Like, the more things change, the more they stay the same, kind of thing. In terms of, there are people that feel that we should just skip over the dictatorship of the proletarian part, and they're not willing to engage in that with the organizations that are said to be representing the working class, whether that's in an electoral parliament situation, or even other organizations. I think Lenin mentioned tenants organizations and other workers organizations, and very today I think the corollary would be community organizations, Acorn, Cope, tenants these all these organizations that pop up trying to make up for all of the failures of capitalism. So we see that a lot right now too. I can tell you, working in social services, social work is such a massive field of employment, especially up here where there's a lot of social problems and poverty. And it just strikes me time and time again how the entire field of work is just helping poor people navigate the obstacles that the government puts in front of them to deter them from getting any money. I mean, it's just class warfare. Where was I going with that? Okay, but that's just because it's like a broken system, right? Like, I hate it. On the one hand, I hate it that I have to do it. On the other hand, I'm happy that I finally have a job that I feel like I'm helping people. But it's like, why does this need to be a thing? And part of that has led me to just not want to engage with it sometimes ever, social services. And but that's just cynicism kind of taking over, essentially. Because if I just eschewed it and ignored it and avoided it, and just it's kind of like burying your head in the sand in a way as well. So the best, so I'm trying to do things on both ends. Like, I'm putting out fires in my social service work, and for whatever way that I can engage in community development and organizational, alliances, and working together for systemic reforms. Like, I'm working as a legal advocate right now, so there's a lot of systemic law reform movements. It's just an example, but I'm doing that on a personal, individual basis. But if I were to just say, oh, I don't like it, it's messy, it's not perfect, it's a result and a consequence of the degradation of capitalism, all of which is true, then it would just get worse. The situation would literally just get worse, because half the problem is lack of staffing, lack of funding, lack of resourcing. So if you ignore it, then they get stronger. And that's kind of the same thing with fascism, I think, as well. And the arguments as to why, why not, they are the same. And I feel like it kind of comes from a lot of puritanical ideology, thinking, I guess, which I understand. I came to this organization as an anarchist, libertarian, socialist, and I still think there's valuable critiques, but I also agree with what I read in Lenin, that as the leading, organizing, guiding, standalone kind of a theory, it's not suitable. I think that's the word he used. Just not it to me. It's more of a valuable critique on power relations, but it's not really a standalone theory, because you got to get from A to B, and you need principles that can give you some objective understanding of the situation. And I think historical dialectics does that well, because it says things aren't just randomly like this, right? There's a reason things are the way they are right now, and that has to do with the motivated interests and activities of the parties involved, and what their motivations and interests are generally depend on their relation to capital and the class that they're in. So why is it overall? I don't know, we got to get over ourselves. And see, the other thing is, people love to also just do the melting pot thing. So they'll either just disengage and avoid it out of being it's, I want my own thing, or or they just want everyone to think exactly the way they are. Sometimes I hear this expressed as the big tent thinking. And you're not going to do that on a larger scale between different groups and factions. That's just trying to beat people over the head and force everyone to become completely one. That's not going to work either, because people aren't going to do that. And then you just won't organize. And then again, this is what matters at the end of the day, right? Has it led to fruitful, productive, effective organizing and some movement in the claiming of power and the improvement of material conditions of the working class? If not, then it's functionally counter-revolutionary. That's how I see it. Okay, I probably spent all my time on it. Fascism mass movement. How to stop fascism without terminating the system that gives rise to it. Yeah, that's a good question. One thing I think that I found very interesting, maybe I could copy paste in the chat if anyone's curious, but I found a section where Lenin was talking about class dynamics and the small petty producers, and he does say that we need to treat them a bit differently than the big capitalists, because they are, again, it depends on the economy and the kind of national economy you have. But in an economy where you have a lot of these petty bourgeois, small producers, artisans, shopkeepers, like they're a lot more entrenched in the economy. And he mentioned that like it's a lot easier to alliance against the big landowners, the big capitalists, right? And this, I think, also leads people into the sort of trap of the Popular Front, thinking, oh, we'll just get the big guys out, and then I think this is what he criticizes Kotsky or some people for reformists. It's like, we'll get them out, and then they'll be more civilized, and then we'll be ruled by the more civilized bourgeoisie, and things will be better. But then, Lenin points out that the fundamental contradiction of the class interests mean that you're just kind of kicking the can down the road. But what do you do about the numerous small producers that are still left over? There, he says the task is political education and persuasion, which is like not fast and easy and quick, and it's not like always that punchy, but that's the reality of it, right? Which is interesting.
Okay, thank you, Flo. Gary, you have up to 6 minutes.
Let me start with this. Fascism, as I was saying in my presentation, is a mass movement that arises at the point where the ruling class is faced with revolutionary possibilities, and it comes at a time when the only way they can see forward is to form a highly authoritative government supported by a mass movement of what may be described as the lumpen proletariat and the frenzied petty bourgeois. That is, the ruling class the middle class is being driven wild by the fact that it's powerless and the economy is ruining them. And all they face is the massive working class organizations and the powerful ruling class and their state. So they're buffeted back and forth. They have no control over what's happening to them. So they begin to galvanize into an organization that mobilizes them on a militarized basis, and they can be mobilized to attack the workers' organizations and bring order to society. And that's so basically, who are the middle class? Basically, we're talking about the small shopkeepers, the small the merchants and the crafts and so on, small crafts, but we're also talking about the professors and the endless range of technocrats and so on in modern society. Lumpen proletariat are people who are not working and are not looking for work. They're kind of declassed, so they don't feel any connection to the working class, and they're not affected or they're not impressed by the gains of the working class because they're not part of the economy. So that's kind of what the fascist is. Now, the way to fight that is forming a united front of all the workers' organizations, the powerful trade unions, the different political groups uniting against fascism to simply defeat fascism in struggle. And that kind of struggle is not only in mass meetings and mass demonstrations, and where necessary, confrontations, armed confrontations, because the fascists will attack those meetings of the working class, and you have to be prepared to defend yourself and fight them off. Now, you see that the problem is all of this arises in the context of a society in a revolutionary, or what quickly is a revolutionary or pre-revolutionary context. And so that if you can beat the fascists, it immediately presents the opportunity to poses the question of taking power, because the ruling class, their last weapon has been defeated. And society is in chaos. Power is lying in the streets, and the workers have to be able to seize it, pick it up, and change society. So that's how defense can switch to offense very rapidly, because the whole situation is pre-revolutionary. That, you know, it's amazing how quick that can happen. And you have to be able to see exactly what is changing. That's what happened in Russia. In July, General Kornilov tried to move into Petrograd and take over, shut down the Soviets and all that kind of stuff. Two problems happened. The Bolsheviks were in the army, and the Bolsheviks were working against him as he brought troops into towards Petrograd. And then the workers in Petrograd went out, met the troops, mingled with the troops, and said, "Join us, brothers. Don't support the defeat of our Soviets." And the army melted away. But immediately the question of power was raised. And in October, the Bolsheviks took power. It was all one continuous process. And so the opposite, you know, you're posed with one or the other at that stage. And so it quickly changes. Did Stalin invent I don't know what Stalin invented and what he didn't, but he certainly picked it up. And it was the Stalinists who made it a huge, it's part of their program to this very day. They still think there's a progressive wing to the Canadian ruling class. They still think that any popular People's Front should contain it, and they ignore the NDP. They're in some unions, and they could play a very insidious role in the trade unions. Like when there was a motion for the CLC to, what was it? Was it CLC or another union? I can't remember. There was a motion to affiliate with the NDP. And they said, well, they raised an issue like, well, according to our constitution, and they started to throw constitutional and nonsense clouds around the whole question, because they don't want the unions to affiliate with the NDP. The NDP is what they object about the NDP is that it is a labor party. It's a party that's based on the trade unions. Then yeah. Anyway, I think on the question of other tendencies, why the left today can't form united fronts. Partly the issues, the organizations of the working class, except for the NDP, and even it is very small, relatively small. You don't have the big forces that contending with one another, literally seeking the attention of the entire working class. And in that context, everything Trotsky says is clearer. You know, the workers will be looking, who's promoting unity? Who is making a proposal that allows us to fight for clear goals and fights for it in ways that actually work, like mass demonstrations and general strikes. That's the kind of situation. Today, the fight is much lower level than that. It's every bit as intense, or at least it should be. The issues are just as intense, but we're just not at that stage yet in the development of class consciousness and the class struggle in Canada. So a lot of people, these small tendencies, have no class base. And they also have a difference from us. We actually see ourselves becoming the leadership of the working class. And we've been working that. Everything we do is oriented to becoming the leadership of the working class. So we orient ourselves to working in the NDP and fighting an unbelievably oppositional leadership that simply refuses to allow democratic rights so that our voice can be heard. Why do you think that they're anti-democratic? They're anti-democratic because they don't want us to speak to the workers, that we can actually win the workers. And if they started doing what we advocate, we would take over the leadership. So their response is anti-democratic, shut us down. Exactly the opposite of what the United Front does. It opens up all the workers to hear us. That's what we want. But the smaller tendencies, they don't have the perspective of ever leading the working class. They are cells. They are groups that feel good among themselves by talking about revolution and so on. And they're petty bourgeois. I mean, they're not oriented really to the working class. Like the Democratic Socialists of Vancouver, for example, struggles to orient itself towards the working class. It will participate in the Vancouver District May Day, but its tendencies is more towards community organizing and not having a clear class analysis. The history of all hitherto existing societies, said Marx in the opening sentence of the manifesto.
30 seconds.
Okay, is the history of class struggle. And we start from that. That is for us the line of division and the line of march. So they don't see the need. To them, they're not trying to get their ideas in front of the working class. They're not even oriented to the working class. So it's simply little groupuscules that for them ideology is everything, and winning the working class to actually take power it's all words to them. They have no idea what that means.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to go back to Bearcat for 3 more questions. Bearcat?
Yep, thank you. So I'll again post the questions in the chat. First one is a long one, so just listen. In 1965, the largest communist party in the world was in Indonesia. Instead of striving for a workers' government, the CPI sought an alliance with the bourgeois nationalist forces led by Sukarno and betrayed the radical left, allowing the state to murder over 500,000 communists and destroying the prospect for democracy, sovereignty, and socialism. A united front could have won in Indonesia, just like the Cuban July 26 movement did in 1959 to 61, putting the interests of workers and farmers first and foremost. How does this policy apply in Venezuela, Palestine, etc. today? Next question is, the operative framework of the Workers' United Front is embodied by the slogan, "March separately, but strive together." What is meant by the dialectic formula? And then the last question comes from Helen. Would you agree that a united front requires the engagement of the leaders of the various workers' organizations, and it can't simply be built over the heads of these organizations?
Okay, we're going to start with Gary and then Flo, and you have up to 6 minutes.
Indonesia was a fundamental tragedy. Yes, it's exactly right. The Stalinists proposed working with petty bourgeois forces, and then Suharto came in and defeated them. Maybe somebody can write in the chat the name of a wonderful movie about that, in which it was a movie about the 1965 takeover and the butchery of people there. And it is true, 500,000 communists, members of the Communist Party, were butchered, and Indonesia became confirmed solidly in the capitalist framework. And it has many, many resources, and they've been available for exploitation by imperialism and the exploitation of the people in Indonesia ever since. It's just another example of the failures of popular fronts. I had limited time, and so I didn't include all of them. Venezuela, first of all, we support the Venezuelan government completely against the sanctions of the United States and the efforts by Canadians and all others to organize an overthrow of the elected Venezuelan government. We are not uncritical of the government of Venezuela. We do think it has accomplished a lot in terms of housing and other gains, education, and so on. But it has left much undone. The main lesson the Venezuelan government, it seems to me, needs to do is rely on the masses. Mobilize the masses independently and allow a government to be formed. Look for, they've changed the constitution at least 2 or 3 times, but it's still not based on organizations in the factories and organizations based on the unions. And they need to reshape the state. They need to get rid of all the elements of the ruling class state, which is built for the purpose of a minority governing a majority, and create a state from the bottom up where the workers absolutely control it. I'm going to stop there because I want to move on to. Now, I'm going to just have to look at the chat for a minute. I would say that the United Front requires the engagement of the leaders of the various workers' organizations, and it can't simply be built over their heads. That's absolutely true. To try to win over the mass of the rank and file of other organizations without action. First of all, if you want an organization involved, you have to get the leadership involved, because they're the people that have the confidence currently of the members of that organization. So you can't, you can see a separation. In the NDP, I see a difference between the right-wing hardened bureaucracy of the NDP and the rank and file. But but they follow the leadership. So you need to go get an organization to organization kind of united front in the streets. And if we were much bigger, we could take actions that would force the NDP to consider us, and we could open the door to them and say, join us, bring your members and join us in the streets. So we would say that to the rank and file, but we would be inviting the leadership to participate. We absolutely want the leaders of these organizations to be out there with us and the workers to see, as Flo said, who's supporting demands that represent the real interests of the workers, who's proposing methodologies that actually work in terms of mass meetings, mass demonstrations, and general strikes, and compare the leaderships, because that's the only way to win them away from their existing misleaderships. So yeah, that's a very good question. You have to, but our fight for the time being in the NDP has to be against the leadership because of its complete lack of democracy. Yeah, march separately and strike together. That's exactly right. The dialectic is that we maintain our own disciplined organization. One of the reasons that we're able to participate effectively in a united front is that we understand our program, we educate our membership, and we educate the leadership continually in what Marxism-Leninism is, how it applies to the current situation, and what slogans and what demands and so on have to be fought for today. Because we have that cohesion, we can work together with other groups. As Barry says, united in action, but separate. We retain our commitment to the working class. We retain our commitment to the overthrow of capitalism and to build a socialist society. And that's why we march separate. We march together, but we are organized separately. How are we going to give it up? How are we just going to mix in with workers who don't have a very developed class consciousness, who don't see that the real problem is the capitalist system itself, who don't understand that we have to get rid of the capitalist system and the workers themselves have to take power. We have to retain that independently. So we march together, but we strike together, but we march in separate organizations that allow us to maintain our developed view, our more advanced view. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, before I go to Flo, I think the movie you were talking about, Gary, was called The Act of Killing.
Maybe.
Yeah, and it was made in 2012, a documentary film about individuals who participated in the Indonesian mass killings of 65, 66. Is that the one?
Okay, there was another one with a person named Hunt. Do you remember that one? I think
this one is directed by Joshua Offenmeyer. But anyway, The Act of Killing is one that was talked about to 500,000 communists. Okay, well, you have up to 6 minutes.
Sure. I think Gary answered the Indonesia question pretty thoroughly. On the slogan, the Workers' United Front is embodied by the slogan, march separately but strike together. Yeah, I love that. I think that sums it up. And to what Gary was talking about, just kind of focuses on the political independence, which I guess I'm realizing now kind of through this how it all fits together and how it all really like works in real life, because I do feel like I've seen recently, and this kind of goes to Helen's question as well, and a bit of a response to the comment in the chat too about it being difficult to actually organize united fronts. And it's basically that, like I was saying, the leadership aspect, I guess I didn't really recognize how integral that was previously, and now I do. And it does really kind of refocus on the internal aspect of it, because as Gary was saying, like you have to kind of maintain this advanced understanding of the situation, of what's really going on, not confused and blinded by all of the charlatans that pop up with increasing frequency as things get worse. So that's kind of like your mainstay is your theory, and the tactics, you know, will depend on the situation, but you know what you really need is a correct analysis of the situation in the first place to determine the right tactics. And so that's where, you know, the party discipline and education and stuff does come in. And that includes, to me, like proper internal party democracy, you know, not to the extent of the anarchist model where it's consensus-based decision-making only. Like I think we've seen in practice, that's very impracticable, and it just can't keep up with the timelines and the urgent timelines of that we need. It is a struggle because I feel like, you know, we are playing catch up a lot, because that's the capitalist game too. They love to keep us busy and surviving, and it is hard to do all the things and be all the places and develop all the things that we need to do. And reading this again, I was just like, wow, yeah, it's a big task that we have in front of us with many different parts, you know, the education, the external, like the internal discipline, the organizational, like there's a lot of different parts, but it's, you know, we need to do it. Someone's got to do it, right? And I think that's the whole thing that we're learning here too. It's like, if we don't do it, the fascists are gonna pretend to, or, you know, the other charlatans and grifters out there. And in terms of it being hard, kind of hard to organize, and you know, Trotsky does mention that too, that it's just in the attempt of organizing where all of this stuff really comes to the fore. And I think that's what I'm kind of realizing too. It's like, you're not really ever going to be sure who's an opportunist until the opportunity comes around. But you can take other protective sort of measures, and one of those would be not ceding political authority or dependence over to this larger body that you don't know if you can trust, because, you know, they're not your party. But even just in the attempt, and I'm seeing this too in our work in the NDP, EDAs and such, that just the attempt of trying to do something and be action oriented is what draws and inspires and motivates people, and can help you know, push people in your direction into understanding Marxism. Again, I think our task is to just help people get to what I consider to be the like correct analysis and understanding. You know, there's obviously always room for debate and within the details, but in terms of class warfare over history, over like a, you know, distributional resources, fights over the distribution of resources and power dynamics, you know, within that, that story hasn't changed yet. But for instance, working within the EDAs, it's just interesting how different our attitude and approach and whole like vibe is when we are in the EDAs, and it's very contrasted to like the professional or even like just long-term NDP member who they just have a very different way of thinking, and it's not creative, it's very closed. I've found as well that in the ideas marketplace, we have a lot more of them than like the sock dams. And that's like, yeah, it's relevant because that's the stuff that gets people like excited. And I've seen it when we're like, okay, we're going to do this. You know, just a little anecdote, like in my EDA, I was like, yeah, I brought up a political issue. And then people were like, we can bring up political issues? And it's an EDA, like a gathering of a political party. And that wasn't even in like, they were like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing that we could maybe do. And they were like, oh yeah, I guess we could. And like, now it's part of the discussion. And just things like that, just being able to properly address cordially, if something isn't being organized well, and just trying to fix it and just doing coordinating stuff, running a meeting, getting your agenda together. It's true what Lenin says, like there's some really good segments in left-wing communism, but he does go on about this, and just about how they just end up falling apart. It's like it doesn't materialize. And why? I think it does come down to Marxists and socialists being driven, right? Because we understand what's going on, and we see the urgency, we see the necessity, we see why we need to understand this and be principled and stick to it. Whereas, what are really the Soc Dems anchored to? Like a nice version of capitalism that doesn't exist. So eventually the contradictions eat them up too. And you can see it, like they get confused and they're very easily distracted, and stuff like that. So we should just keep kind of doing what we're doing, out organizing folks. But it's it's hard because there's just so much to do. And I think it does call us to think about how we are using our time and our action, because it's really just a very large scale of activities that we need to pull off. So we need recruitment.
30 seconds.
And we can do that through the United Front.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the other film, I think, Gary, that you were talking about is The Year of Living Dangerously,
Yes,
starring Linda Hunt.
Linda Hunt, yes.
Okay, so, all right, so we're going to go back to our producer for the 3 final questions. And I will also add a minute or so for a wrap up. If you missed out on something you wanted to say along the line besides answering the questions. So you each will have 6 minutes to do all of that in. And now back to the producer for the last 3 questions. Erica?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. So the first question comes from Robert. Should the United Front come from above or below? The second question is, how do we effectively engage in a united front? And then the last question is, the oxygen of the workers' movement is workers' democracy. How does the United Front maximize the basis for democratic dialogue without paralyzing the movement with abstract academic discussion? Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to start with Flo and then Gary. You have to 6 minutes to answer the question and do a wrap up if you would like.
Okay, maybe I will answer question 3. How does the United Front maximize the basis for democratic dialogue without paralyzing the movement with abstract academic discussion? Because it ties into the other ones. It's interesting. Trotsky kind of mentioned this specifically in relation to the People's Front, and that formulation with the committees of action is what he recommended that would make it more democratic and potentially suitable for like proletarian control. So really, I think the answer there would be just structural. How do you structure decision making so that it is somewhat democratic? Because Trotsky's, one of his great complaints there with the Radical Party was he noticed that there was little engagement with the rank and file, with the party's leadership, and that the party was not very democratic, and the Radical Party was had like the privileged position and was kind of, I guess, throwing its weight around on the People's Front as a whole, and the working class groups were subordinate to their interests. So his counter proposal was, if, well, ostensibly they're all about democracy, right? Everybody loves democracy, apparently. And so he's like, well, do it yourself then at home within the organization and have committees of action, which would essentially be like congregations of workers of various sizes or units, but normally like factories or towns, similar to worker committees, and eventually what would could become and form a Soviet. But that was his recommendation, and say, have actual grassroots connection to the decision-making bodies of a popular front, and then that would make it more of a united front. And so in that sense, he also, I mean, then Lenin was speaking to the, as like a counter argument to the critique that you know, the leadership of the Communist Party, it shouldn't be about the dominance of the party. It should be about the proletarian as class. And essentially they were saying that there's going to be a difference. It's going to be a rift between the leadership and the masses, and therefore, you know, it's not democratic. It was essentially an anarchist argument, or like a left-wing complaint. And I mean, Lenin was saying that in the formation of organizations and political parties, leadership does develop because people are at different stages of understanding in their and skill and capacity. So some people become leaders, and just for practical reasons, the leaders would be involved in the United Front. So it would, like, I think that's where you just have to balance reality, and that's one of the many places where there is no easy straight answer. Actually, I love this in left-wing communism. There's a few times that Lenin really goes, like, digs against this whole notion that you can have like a one size fits all tactic. And he's like, just because like we say this and you think that, you know, we were for party democracy, but that doesn't mean that, you know, you can't have any leadership, or just taking something and generalizing it, like, you know, uncritically overgeneralizing it. And there's a few different instances of this, and the anarchists were pretty famous for doing that kind of thing, and social democrats too. But yeah, you're just saying that that's just very childlike and foolish, and you know, each situation kind of renders its own application of the United Front tactics. But that, yeah, just essentially that you need to balance these interests. And I think that in terms of the United Front, that democracy is going to have to happen internally within the organizations. You know, I'd say externally, it's not really the problem of the Revolutionary Party, how democratic or undemocratic the other organizations are. We should be acting cordially, democratically in leadership roles, in coordinating roles whenever we can, in order to just engender good faith and, you know, sense of principled action among people, in order to recruit and get bigger. But aside from that, I think that's how you do it.
Okay, thanks, Will. Gary, you have up to 6 minutes to answer questions and do a wrap up if you wish.
Thank you. Is the United Front organized from above or below? Both. You know, if you're in a situation where mass action is called for and the workers are in motion, or even at the level of simply meetings and discussions, then workers will be talking to each other, but also the leadership of a revolutionary party knows about this tactic and will call upon the other leaderships to join us in the streets, join us, come together, meet, agree on slogans, and help us move the workers out into the streets. So the answer will be both. And certainly once the United Front gets going and the workers start marching shoulder to shoulder, the social democratic worker will be talking to the revolutionary worker, who is a disciplined Bolshevik. So they're not going to be talking about the weather, that's for sure. They're going to be talking about politics and you know, people, workers. So the leadership has responsibility for proposing it to the other leadership, but that's in a situation where there's some indication that the workers are already looking for common action. How effectively how do we effectively engage in the United Front? We strive for united fronts wherever we work. For example, the Socialist Caucus in the United States, we strive to have groups of, anybody who's oppositional to the leadership from the left and the NDP, we will work with, and we call on them to work with us, but we refuse to give up our program and our perspective. We understand the NDP is an obstacle to the revolution. There's an expression that was used by a predecessor organization of ours called the NDP is in the way and on the way. That is, we go into it and look for workers who are looking for political for a political way forward and recruit them to be revolutionaries. But the NDP leadership are social democrats. They support capitalism. We support revolutionary workers' power, and so they're in the way. And a united front of those who understand the need to oppose that and to start moving towards building a different kind of workers' leadership is what we need to do. And that includes a lot of people who are not revolutionary socialists. It includes workers who are just frustrated by not being able to be heard. It means people who are left social democrats and agree with and although they may not, they don't. The main thing about a left social democrat is they may have a lot of radical proposals, but they don't understand the nature of the state, and they don't understand the bourgeois state will have to be dismantled and a new state built from the ground up. If you're organizing your committees of action in the factories, it's very hard to have it represented by a bourgeois because it's the workers in the factories who decide who's going to represent them. So we can't make other people and other leaderships. Here's the thing: in small groups, there often is no workers' mass. There is no workers' mass. So all you have is an ideological leadership that is committed to a different perspective than us, they're petty bourgeois and they're idealists. They don't have a materialist analysis of the situation. They don't fundamentally understand the only force that can change that is the working class, and then only through the leadership of people who understand all that and understand the history of tactics and strategy can that happen. See, like as I said before, we're committed to a revolution, really committed. We understand what it takes. The other people don't have that understanding. They're all about protecting their ideology. We don't have an ideology. Marxism is not an ideology. It is a set of tools for understanding, for recording lessons of past struggles, understanding class analysis, and helping to formulate a way forward. And that way forward is infused with our commitment to the working class. We know which class we're for. We know which side we're on. And the social democratic leadership, the top leadership, they also know which class they're for. They're for the capitalist class. That's why they are so inimical to us. I think in the NDP, the fight for democracy, and the question on the oxygen of the workers' movement is democracy. If we let them shut down democracy without a massive fight, we're shutting down the oxygen in the NDP. We're letting them shut down the oxygen. So the fight for democracy in the NDP is the fight for workers to hear the other side of the story, to hear that there's more than simply elections and deals with the liberals and minor reforms and all that. There's more, and that we don't have to support the Canadian military, which serves no useful purpose. The last time we were attacked was 1812, but it was the Americans that attacked us. We have not needed an army since 1821. That's all wasted money. 2% of our GDP to NATO? What nonsense. That's why we need oxygen. We need the oxygen to be put back into the NDP. And there's a layer within the EDAs. By the way, an EDA is an electoral district association. It's what we used to call riding associations. And that's what Flo was talking about, her experience working in NDP riding associations and the kind of people you meet there. And so how can we be effective in the United Front? If we can form them and generally speaking, United Front, I'll wind up on this. Back in the days of the anti-war movement, anti-Vietnam War movement, and that we have to struggle desperately to create a new anti-war movement to fight the endless war scenario that the United States is trying to invoke against Russia and China, and will invoke unless there's a mass movement to stop them. And back in the days of the movement against the war in Vietnam, we didn't support. Some people said we support the National Liberation Front of Vietnam. We didn't, because they were Stalinists. They were not a good leadership, but they were fighting, and we supported their fight against the United States ruling class. We aimed our demands at our government: bring the boys home, end Canadian complicity. And the Vietnamese thanked us for that. Even the Stalinists thanked us, because it was so big and it paralyzed the ability of the ruling class, the United States and Canada, to support the war. But in the meetings of in the big conferences that were held in the anti-war movement, Stalinists and Social Democrats thought there should simply be representatives of organizations should meet in some kind of conference. And we said, no, we want an open meeting of all activists, because we knew that would be a more democratic meeting. We could either have a meeting with two Trotskyists, two Social Democrats, two people from the Anglican Church, two people from the Socialist Party of the United States, and we would be overwhelmed, because there's no rank and file there. It's just a meeting of committed opponents of the working class, together with a couple who represent the working class. So what we said, and this is the dialectics of it, we said, no, the meeting has to include the people doing the work, the people who are out in the streets, the people who are putting up the posters, the people who are passing out the leaflets, who are printing the leaflets, and all that stuff. So we said, no, one vote, one activist, one vote. And so that was an interesting
30 seconds.
That was an interesting it was a united front, but it was a united front of the activists, and it was a place where the working class leadership was not participating, particularly. As a matter of fact, the union leaderships were opposed to the anti-war movement in the United States. So that was another approach to fighting for democracy in the anti-imperialist movement. Oops, I have a dog who has a comment. I think I'll turn off here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our program. I would like to thank our online audience for listening or watching, and for our future audience who will follow this on YouTube. So if you agree with what you heard tonight during this program, please join Socialist Action. Just sign up at our website, socialistaction.ca, or by calling 647-986-1917. So special thanks to our speakers, Flo and Gary, to our technical producer, Barakat Gutta in Vancouver, and to our political producer, Barry Weisleiter in Toronto. And as I said, if you'd like to talk to us about joining SA, write to socialistactioncanada@gmail.com, or just call 647-986-1917. The show has been recorded and can be seen on the Socialist Action YouTube channel. The next webcast will be Thursday, April the 6th, on the topic, the Communist Manifesto, an introduction, with a presentation by Barry Weisleiter, the Federal Secretary of Socialist Action. That's Thursday, April the 6th, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The Zoom link will soon be on the SA website. In the meantime, be safe, stay healthy, and stay active. Bye for now.
Yep.